We will start, from where we had paused, and we will continue with our discussion of causation in history. So, what we find is it becomes very clear from our previous discussion that there is an ambiguity of, of say about the causes, whether the causes should be considered very crucial for history writing or there are something else. Because of late, the scholars have started bringing in the concept of the narrative, the text and intertext into the discussion, and they say that it is the narrative which decides or defines history writing. So, the authority of empiricism as a tool of knowing and its ability to establish and explain the, say, causal connections is open to question. It is being debated. Therefore, historians like Hayden White, an American historian who has a background in literary criticism, the work Meta History is very important in this connection. Meta History, the historical imagination of in 19th century Europe, where he is arguing that the narrative as an explanation of causal connectivity is imposed. It's not something natural which is coming, it is imposed because when historian is doing history, in his mind it is prefigured and it is already imagined before jumping into writing by the historian himself. So these factors, this prefiguring or determining the approach and the perception of history is also influencing writing of history. So that should be taken into consideration when you are writing history. He is suggesting that it is naive as any rustic empiricist evidence. He is using the word, rustic empiricist evidence, causation and narrative symmetry is a very mechanical one. It should be not so mechanical. So there is something, which we can say that, he is not using this term, but we can use this. The nature of discussion permits us that, he is thinking of something which is a kind of an organic development which is taking place where the historian is unable to separate himself from, imagining beforehand what he wants to do. So his argument is that the idea that the causes for events, that is, or reasons, conscious or unconscious, for events taking place as they are in fact they did, and which are set forth in the narrative in the form of a story that it tells. So this recognizes the variety of narratives that is possible to be created and to be narrated, to be told, and themselves, the narrations themselves prefigure the type of causal connections which historian is going to make. So White's heavy emphasis is that the evidence to possess beliefs in all manners of things that influence their linking or thinking about how history works in epistemology is inherent, inbuilt. So according to him, history is a literary artifact. So because he is a literary critic, so he is emphasizing that literary artifact, and historians make causal links as part of their overall constitution, and thus prefiguration of historical field with the help of the imagination of the historian and the employment of the trope, emplotment, argument, and ideological preferences and philosophical orientations. There are so many things which is affecting that narration. So therefore, it appears finally that causation is central to history writing, but some historians are arguing otherwise. They are preferring the other thing. So according to Christopher Lloyd, the famous historian, he says that historians could be could be the fault of philosophers because of their lack of agreement about the nature of causal explanations. This I am referring to his famous book, The Structures of History, written few decades earlier, 1993. So there he is saying that when you are talking in terms of bringing in narrative before causes, that is some kind of a elusive thing, because he is saying that that is because of the because of the nature of philosophers who put things like this, but the historians will have a different orientation. So he questions whether narration on its own can provide a realist understanding of history. Narration he is questioning. So he argues whether it is possible to know and to explain explain the history of human societies, and if so, how these tasks might provide a framework and methods to realize that objective and objective understanding of the past. Is it possible? It is not an impossible ambition, but it is not possible. This kind of ambiguity is there. So the thrust of this account is against the relativism of authors like Rorty, modern authors, postmodern philosophers, Foucault and Derrida, and for the complex socio-historical realism, the anthropologists, who have, in their works, they have emphasized certain other things like Clifford Geertz, Gellner, Emmanuel Roy Ladurie, the famous French historian, and Mann. So, according to Lloyd, causal explanation is necessarily bound up with, it is interlinked with hypothesis testing and model making, without which historians will not be able to offer a convincing explanation of an event, of an incident in history. Therefore, according to him, the need for historian today is to establish first the causal connections between complex social structures, and that ask for the construction of the problems and objects of inquiry, which will take place within theories that are responsive to empirical findings that they help to uncover and interpret. Meaning thereby that he is suggesting that you will have to understand a particular happening in history in a particular social context in which it is taking place. So he is emphasizing the context in that connection instead of the narrative. Is telling us the objective conditions in which the historical event has taken place, and that one could know only by looking into the hypothesis, hypothesis testing and model making. This is important. So, in other words, he is saying that you, like a scientist, you must have hypothesis, and then you go on testing this on the basis of those qualifications, which is under he is emphasizing. Like Patrick Gardiner, whom we have already discussed, Lloyd also seems to be saying that empiricism alone is never enough. Empiricism, the mere facts are not adequate enough, they are not self-eloquent so far history is concerned. Therefore, it has to be essentially theoretically informed, and so by implication, the form, the framework which the causal analysis is cast is of secondary significance. You will have to look into those things. Until unless you have some theoretical background behind your enterprise, historical enterprise, I mean, according to him, according to Lloyd, it will be very difficult to grasp history. It will be very dispersed history. It will not be focused history. So, there are two major trends relating to the role of causes in writing history. The empiricists, we know that for them, the facts are important, but only facts are important. So, centrality of causation in historical discourse is, lost sight of by the pure empiricists. So, there is lack of social science explanation also, which I explained in my earlier part. I had told you that why theoretical background is essential for understanding a particular event. Search for the Holy Grail, the Last Supper, in which the Holy Grail was had received such a big importance in Christian religion. We find that this search for this Holy Grail means the ultimate truth is causes, real causes, is now discredited. What is always was, example of bad metaphysics we will call. Therefore, these are the major trends, but we will have to take into account why this shift in focus is taking place. Head and White had argued that this shift in focus was from from empiricist analysis to causal analysis to text-based analysis. Analysis of history as a discourse rather than simply as a trade in empirical data organized via free market of social history theory. So, according to him, the history is increasingly seen as being constituted through the poetic, ideological, and ethical decisions of the historian. So, these are the background influences which is influencing the historian to look at particular event from a particular ideological or theoretical point of view. That one has to take care of. So, now there is a gradual realization that empirical foundation, which was so much in vogue in 19th century, when I said that this was the cult of facts century, empirical foundation is scarcely a sheet anchor which ensures an unfolding of the real past. In other words, this the relativity is questioned. It is no more being assigned that much of primacy, which earlier in the 19th century or in the even 20th century, some part of 20th century, the people were assigning this role to them. So, historians are becoming conscious of their role in writing in evidentially secure, and their endeavor is to retain this spirit of historiography. I deliberately call it the spirit of historiography. The spirit of historiography, by that I mean the reliability of history. So that is important for them. That is the cardinal principle which one should not ignore. I would like to go a bit a longer discussion because this the history is increasing, facing this challenge, and that should not, we can't say that it has passed us by, but we'll have to understand, and we will have to take into consideration what these postmodernist historians are telling us. They are also historians, they also have certain points. Let us see what they are telling. So, how what is their approach towards causes or narrative kind of things. First, the major author, a philosopher who comes to our mind is Michel Foucault. The argument is that historical knowledge cannot distinguish between what philosophers of history think and what practitioners do, means what historians do. So, he is admitting that this approach of the two are different towards history. The philosophers of history are thinking on different wavelength, and the practitioners of history are practicing something different. So, he is questioning that, and he says that it is only when history is busy evaluating its philosophy and where its knowledge comes from, how it is used, that is, the history is used, that we can confront new issues like causation and the nature of change over time. That binary, he says that we can confront that, we can grapple with this problem later on. So, he has radically challenged, in fact, the conventional notion of causality, which which Carr and others were telling us. He identified 4 epistemes for that. He uses the term epistemes, the discourse and these things has particular significance in his writings. He is using 4 epistemes. Epistemes he wishes to designate how a culture acquires and organizes knowledge, challenging this conventional notion of causality. And in challenging, he is giving us an alternative method through which we should look at history, and in which he has identified 4 epistemes. By epistemes, he has a particular connotation behind it. He says that these terms he is using to designate how a culture acquires and organizes knowledge in a given period of time, in a given historical period. Now, he deploys a paradigm of 4 epistemes, that historical epochs do not grow organically out of each other. There is no interconnectedness between the two, two epochs, but instead, and this he says that quite unexpectedly emerge homologously to fill in the epistemological spaces suddenly vacated by other conditions of knowledge creation. So, by this, his causality does not exist in the modernist sense of evolving historically, but rather he issues forth, it issues forth structurally as a discursive formation. Another problem a historian faces is, can he afford to believe historical events as inevitable, unavoidable, inescapable, or ineluctable? Can he afford to do this? Will history be shorn of excitement of discovery of facts or narration? Another related question would be, was the advent of Aryans inevitable in the context of India? I am saying, was the emergence of Mauryan Empire unavoidable? Were the three battles of Panipat inescapable? Was the freedom movement in India inevitable? Or for that matter, a revolt of 1857 inevitable? In other words, should we expect that such events were not preceded by antecedent causes? Meaning thereby that we are admitting that there should be some antecedent causes which will precede the particular event. So, such problems, they expose the historian to theoretically conceivable might have been of history. Might have been. What has happened, but this kind of arguments will say that a kind of counterfactual thing, that what could have had happened. So, there is every likelihood of allowing your imagination to run riot. I told you that one should have controlled speculation. It will unleash, the imagination, historical imagination, if you can say, run riot on all the more agreeable things that might have had happened. Should the historian close his inquiry by accepting such historical events as fait accompli, that it was bound to happen, it was predetermined, by the social conditions or by economic conditions or by divine interventions were bound to happen? So, where is the scope for the historian to intervene? Who will analyze those things of the past? So, the doctrine of inevitability of an event has raised many eyebrows. The other serious problem in writing history is the subscription to the doctrine of accidents. Some historians contend that history is by and large a chapter of accidents or catalogue of accidents, a series of events. By that I mean a series of events that which were determined by chance coincidence. That by chance it happened, and attributed only to most casual causes. Somebody might say that you met with an accident, it was bound to happen because it was pre-decided when you entered and you entered onto the road, the bus was coming and it was bound to hit you. Can history be so simplistic? That is the question. The famous example of Cleopatra's nose is cited as that example. She was a beautiful lady, nobody doubts that. And it is said that the Battle of Actium was not due to standard causes. The war between two empires, between Egypt and Greece. No. According to them, it was due to Antony's infatuation with Cleopatra. As if, had there been no infatuation or had there been no Cleopatra, there would not have been any war. Then the question arises, should we think that behind every battle there was a lady? No, that will be unhistorical. So, these kind of attributions are open to question and we should accept them with a pinch of salt. When Bajazet or Bayezid I first was deterred by an attack of gout from marching into Central Europe, he was inflicted by the gout, which prevented him from moving fast or moving outside. Similarly, when King Alexander of Greece died in the autumn of 1920 from a bite of a pet monkey, he had a monkey which had bitten him, he was possibly had turned rabid. And this accident had devastating consequences because no less a quarter of a million of persons died because of this monkey bite, according to Churchill, because the battle was lost. So when Trotsky contracted fever while he was shooting ducks, which disabled him in his quarrel with, ideological quarrel with Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Stalin in 1923. So, he lost the ground. Therefore, Antony's infatuation with Cleopatra, or Bajazet's attack of gout, or Trotsky's feverish chill, these events were as much causally determined as anything else that happens. They also had causes. So, sir, he is a favorite of mine, but he is a rationalist. Sir Asia Berlin, he has written many books. I had earlier also referred to his idea of reality book. Here I am, concerned with his book, Historical Inevitability. Historical Inevitability. Look at the title. That suggests what kind of history he had in imagination, what he was contemplating about, in which he is referring to Bernard Berenson's article on accidental view of history, in order to bolster his point of argument that accidents do play a very crucial role in history, which would in a way suggest that in Greek history, when Herodotus is writing about some war, and he says that, and for that, this is one of the weaknesses in Herodotus, then think of the time period when he's writing in the, early period, 5th century BC. And he is saying that Apollo intervened, the god intervened. Therefore, this victory was denied to a party and was given to another party. Now, these are, unhistorical explanations. Sir Aisha Berlin considered that the role of accident is responsible behind events. So, he regarded accidents playing a crucial role in explaining certain historical events and emphasized an absence of causal determinism. In other words, he is challenging the age-old precept of historiography that there is causation in history which is responsible and which is the responsibility of the historian to look at. Therefore, the question arises how this complicates the exercise for a historian. How can one discover in history a coherent sequence of cause and effect if it is so dependent upon accidents? An accident, by the very word, means it happens accidentally. It is not a regular phenomenon. So, how will you explain so many things which has happened? So, therefore, it will be impossible for a historian to have a coherent sequence of cause and effect, which is sine qua non for historiography. One has to, it's an essential condition for writing history. Another question is that how can one find any meaning of history if sequence is liable to be broken, disrupted, or deflected at any moment by some other unexpected incident? By that I mean the accidents. This means accepting the role of chance in history. For example, Polybius, the Greek historian, was possibly the first historian to consider chance as an important factor. But when Gibbon was writing his history, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, he, you know, he considered this to be, not so important because the triumphs of Rome was, according to him, not due to the, if we accept, chance as a factor, then it would mean that it was not due to the merit of the, but due to the fortune of the republic. But fortune of the republic can't win a war. Tacitus was another historian who spoke about decay of his country. In his work, one can find his extensive reflections on chance. Frequently, he will say that this, suddenly happened because of that, this kind of political developments or other developments took place. So, after 1914, when the World War had begun, some British historians also started espousing the importance of accidents in history writing, because a new kind of environment was taking shape, that too with a great speed, the speed associated with the enormity of the war, then the quickness of the war and its quickness in the expansion of its horizon, ultimately involving almost many of the continents. So, the British historians thought that how come this has happened? It had not earlier happened. So, why did it happen? So, there is some scope for chance. John, Bagnall Bury, J.B. Bury, who is essentially a Greek, writing on Greek history, he wrote an article in 1909 which is known as Darwinism in History, meaning by survival of the fittest. So, that brought to focus the element of chance coincidence. Chance coincidence. So, his work is also, it's a very good work, I don't deny that. We all developed our knowledge about Greek history on the basis of, largely on the basis of J.B. Bury. But when he is assigning chance a role in history, then it becomes a little, his exercise becomes a little suspect before those historians who believe in chance, not in chance but in causes. H.L. Fisher, is another historian who wrote A History of Europe in 1935. Now, this gentleman also recognized the play of the contingent and the unforeseen in history. By this, he means the role of accidents in history. If you read his preface, where he is asserting that progress is not a law of nature. This is, absolutely unhistorical statement. Progress is not the law of, not a law of nature. So, he refuses to see history as a plot, a rhythm. He writes, I am quoting him, a plot, a rhythm, a predetermined pattern. So, his argument is that in history, one emergency follows another. Contingent follows the other contingent. So, he and advised the historians to recognize that in the development of human destinies or societies, the play of the contingent and the unforeseen is very important. As if, he is assigning a central role to accidents in history. But in the main text, he is forgetting what he is prescribing in the preface. This is very interesting. When you read his main text, you will find that generalizations which assume a long predetermined sequence, you can find there. The very opening words of the book are, we Europeans are the children of Hellas, Greeks. Now he is writing in 1935, and he is tracing the history of Europe from the time of the Greeks, 2,500 years ago. So, if he believed that it was the accidents were so important, then why such a continuous, you know, plot he is making? Why he is tracing such a long, arduous, centuries and centuries for justifying that Europeans are superior? Um, First, I was just thinking that who is the first who is questioning it. So, to my mind, the Enlightenment philosopher Montesquieu comes to our mind. He was possibly the first who tried to defend the laws of history against such kind of intrusions, that accidents and contingency is very important. He is not agreeing with that. I quote him. He is saying that if a particular cause, like the accident result of battle, has ruined a state, he observed that this on the greatness and decline of Romans, there was a general cause which made the downfall of that state ensue from a single battle. Marxist historians also had some difficulty over this question. Marx writes and that is a solitary evidence. Marx writes in a letter, which is a solitary letter, where he is saying that world history would have a very mystical character if there were no room in it for chance. If it will appear as if he is also conceding something to chance. So this chance itself naturally becomes part of the general trend of development and is compensated by other forms of chance, but acceleration and retardation of historical movement depend on such accidentals within quote, which include the chance within quote, character of the individuals who are at the head of the movement at the outset, which would mean that there is a apology for chance in history given by Marx on 3 counts, 3 points, that it was not very important. It could, when he is saying that it could accelerate or retard, but radically alter the course of events. Secondly, one chance was compensated by another, which Marx is writing in that quotation, so that in the end, chance will be, this is very curious. If you are giving chance such an important role, then one chance which will, the preceding chance will be cancelled by the succeeding chance. So where is history then? Chance was essentially illustrated in the character of individuals. Eventually, a consensus has been reached among the historians that accidents expresses our measure of ignorance, if I may say so. So, in the assessment of looking at role of causation in history, we will have to think over certain things. I stop here and then I will continue.